Bhavani Devi is India's fencing contestant at the Olympics. She actually won Asian championships before she actually went there. But there's a story. I was reading an interview about her, and she was revealing how she was supported in her fencing career multiple times by people. So she shared how her own mother sold her jewelry for about $6,000 just to be able to help her participate in fencing. And as she competed in the sport, there's as it happens with many Indian sports persons, she was short of funds. She's from Tamil Nadu, so she ended up approaching Jayalalitha, who was not the chief minister at that time. She went there and said, "Hey, you know what? I need funds." And apparently Jayalalitha called her and gave her a check, I'm assuming from her personal money, which allowed her to go, buy equipment and fly and compete, etc. So the journey of this young lady, Bhavani Devi, from being, a rural Tamil Nadu schoolgirl to representing India in fencing at Tokyo Olympics is, while we tend to look at these stories as individual triumph, but the truth is that all along this journey, she's actually had allies which have helped her get there. And that's one of the themes that we'll be exploring. And in order to do that, I'm going to hand over quickly to my colleague Gurleen.
Hi everyone. So we would start off with a small poll of sorts, and I'm sharing my screen, and I'm hoping you all are able to see the question. All you have to do is figure out of these 5 options, what are the activities that an ally do, or how do you associate, if you associate any of these activities with an ally. The first one being stand up for someone who is not being allowed to speak in meeting, dismiss experiences beyond their own, support other person's growth or dream of goals. When someone proposes a good idea, repeat it and take their credit. Invite members of underrepresented groups within your company to speak at staff meetings, write for company-wide newsletter, or take on other highly visible roles. So we have our eyes on the chat box, and whatever options you feel stand with that of a description of an ally, please type it there. The answer could be more than one as well. The stage is yours. So I see AE, ACE, AE, AE, actually ACNE. Devi says, Resham says ACNE, John says ACE again, Nimisha ACE, interesting. Rahul ACE, Shaheen ACE, Sandhya ACE, Nancy ACE. So we have common answers. That's great. That's great. Handing it over to Aman to further take it.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for that quick round of participation. I'll be honest, we had not planned this in any way. We had not anticipated that that ace would come up. So, but you're saying allies are aces, and we believe you. And I think there's clear agreement on what an ally is not. And there's clear, I think by and large, we agree on what an ally is. So thank you very much for sharing what your views are. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to invite my colleague Mishti, who's going to give you a little information on what Inclusion Circles is and why we do this. So, Mishti.
Thank you so much, Aman. Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome once again. And thank you all for being allies and supporting us in this space of inclusion circles. So inclusion circles are essentially safe spaces for people to air their views on diversity, equity, and inclusion beyond any judgment or bias. We also use an acronym called the SIP, which is, you could very comfortably have your tea and coffee and listen to these interesting stories on diversity, equity, and inclusion here. So S is for stories, I is for inspiration, where there'll be a lot of room for powerful inspiration, and P, practices on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The construct is that after we do some sharing, discussion, and transformational stories with our powerful guests, we open the forum to some sharing. And we invite all of you to share your experiences as well. So it's an intimate, informal gathering. And once again, welcome and experience the Inclusion Circle. Over to Aman now to invite our wonderful guest today and introduce her as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so very much, Mishi, for helping our participants today see what Inclusion Circle is. And as you go on, you'll get a feel of the format as well. And the privilege of introducing our guest today happens to be mine. It's very interesting how Namratha and I actually got connected. We actually connected through LinkedIn. And Namratha had put up a post which was related to inclusion, and I looked at that and I responded, and we had similar thoughts, and we kind of connected on that. And then after that connection is when we started exchanging numbers and getting to know each other. So and I'm going to share with you other stuff about Namratha as well. But what I discovered initially is what a wonderfully warm and friendly person she is, and I'd like to put that first before some of the other stuff. And some of the other stuff is that Namratha's been in the HR space for 30 years, and she's been a multinational professional, truly, not just working for multinational organizations, but she's worked in India, she's worked in China, she's worked in Singapore, she's worked in the United States, she's worked for organizations such as Cisco, Groupon, Microsoft, and early on the Tata Group as well. And what she's done some great work around diversity and inclusion. She believes passionately in the transformative power of diverse and inclusive communities. She has leveraged her agency to raise awareness, help educate, and create workplaces where everyone can be their authentic selves. And what she's also done is she's elevated the work of employee resource groups. She's increased the representation and engagement of diverse communities. And importantly, she's activated allyship models that have enabled her to demonstrate impact during the course of her career. So that's a little bit about Namratha. And as we talk to her today, you're going to discover more about her. Namratha, thank you so much for making time for us, and a very, very warm welcome to Inclusion Circles today.
Thank you, Aman. It's, lovely to be here. I was just saying to Aman and the team that I'm not an expert by any means, on the subject. I'm learning just like everybody else here. So for me, the chance to talk to everybody and in this, really nice, very, intimate setting, as Aman said, is just, really bi-directional, right? I hope to share what I have learned and what I have actually experienced, and I've made a lot of mistakes on the way. I'll share those mistakes with you as well, but I also hope to learn from everybody on the call. So I think your format is a terrific one, where we invite everybody to participate as well. So let's make sure we have, enough time to do that too.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Namratha. So, you mentioned that you've had a journey, I guess, which has been full of, mistakes, but also good stuff. So how about telling us a little bit about your journey?
Yeah. So I will share some insights with everybody, not my professional journey, because you can all go to LinkedIn to look at that. So that's not what I'm going to share. But when I was preparing for this, Aman warned me. He said, this is a conversation, so don't over prepare. So I wasn't over preparing, but I was just thinking about it, right? I was thinking about my own life with the lens of inclusion. So let me put it that way. And so I was thinking back to how I was raised, the culture in which I was raised, the values that I was raised with, and how those have helped me and also sometimes worked against me. And so that those were my reflections. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with you all. So, I think it helps for us to relate at a personal level to one another. So I'll share a little bit about me personally. So we were just joking that there are a lot of Hyderabad fans on this call. So I'm a big Hyderabad fan. I'm a Hyderabadi. I've been born and raised in this area. So in a small town near Hyderabad, Vijayawada, where my parents live to this day. And so it was a very provincial town, not more than maybe 10 roads when I was born and I was growing up there. And, Aman has been posting some really interesting stories as a run up to this event. I don't know if all of you have read them. If you haven't, please do go and read them. All of them have been really inspirational, but the one that made me reflect is the one on Kadambini Ganguly. That lady who went to medical school in the late 1800s and whose father insisted that she be educated. And her husband sued the editor of a magazine because he wrote disparagingly about her. And I was just thinking about this and thinking that, those two actions, the one of her father insisting that she be educated and the other one of her husband actually not just understanding, empathizing, but taking action, that is allyship. And that would have lifted generations after Kadambini herself. And so when we talk about, allyship and privilege, I think any small action that we do or actions that have been taken by our own families ahead of us, I think they've really lifted generations. So it made me very grateful for the privilege that I had. And we'll come to privilege in a little bit, and what that really means. But I've been enormously privileged, right? I was born in a very small town, but my grandfather was in the same mode of insisting that his daughter, who's my mother, be educated. My mother is 85. And so you can imagine, this was like the 1930s, right? So he insisted and made sure that she was educated, and not just educated, but worked. And so my mom, I think, was a little bit lazy, and she said, I don't want to work. And he said, no, that's not a choice. You're going to work because you're educated. And so once she got used to that, then she worked till she retired at 60. So what did that do for us? I think that lifted the whole family up. The woman being educated, the mother being educated. So the values that I was raised in, and values and the culture that we're raised in our households, are really important to us because we view the world with those lenses. So the value that I was raised with was everybody should work, right? You don't have a choice. Everybody should work. So I, for the longest time in my life, was biased against people who did not work. And I could not understand, why would anybody drop out of the workforce? Because I never did. I had 2 kids and I had my in-laws and my parents, and I balanced all this and I could do it. So why is someone else not able to do it? And so why are they actually leaving? And so you see, that is, I feel terrible about it, but that's the kind of exclusionary behavior that I had for the longest time because of my own orientation from my childhood. So back to my grandfather. My grandfather also did something extraordinary, which is he did not pierce. He actually refused to pierce my mother's ears. So my mother is the only Indian woman that I know on this planet who doesn't wear earrings. And that is monumental because this was 1935, you guys, okay? And he said a woman needs to have choice. So I'm not going to pierce her ears and objectify her when she's a baby. So when she grows up, if she wants her ears pierced, she's going to do it herself. And my mother chose not to when she grew up. So come to me. I was born, and when I was little, I used to pester my parents, who were probably given in just because I was such a pest. But my grandfather had this rule for me too. We're not going to pierce her ears until she's old enough to make that decision for herself. So until I was about, I don't know, about 18 years old, I didn't have earrings. I didn't have ears pierced because, you know, they wouldn't let me. Then I grew up and could make my own decisions. And so these, Aman's post made me think back about my own childhood and about these hugely powerful allies. You know, my grandfather, who was born in the early part of the 20th century, insisting that the women in his family had the right to choose, and being a huge ally, just like this Kadambini Ganguly's husband. So allyship is not just about saying, it's about doing. It's not a noun, it's a verb. If it's a noun, that it becomes performative allyship. Performative allyship is when we say things, but actually don't do anything about it. So that's the first thing that I want everybody to actually differentiate, you know, in their minds, right? So the latter part, when I was growing up, we lived multiculturally, and that's another privilege that I have, which I need to use more of to help others. I don't use enough of that privilege, but the privilege I had was of growing up from Vijayawada to the Caribbean, right? My parents moved to the Caribbean, so I was raised in the West Indies. I was 8 years old, could not speak a word of English, not a word. And when I went to school for the first time, the first day, it was like overwhelming. But I clearly remember a little girl, her name was Teresa. I remember the name. She came, took my hand, and led me in, knowing with a child's instinct that I needed support. And so what did she do? She used her privilege, right? She used her privilege to look around her and say, well, who's not here that should be here? So we jump to organizations, let's jump to our workplace, right? When we think about, well, you know, there are people who have tremendous tenure in the organizations that we all work at, right? And that brings a certain privilege. We have networks, we have tenures, and so we get a seat at the table much easier than other people who might have come after us. Like I joined Microsoft just 4 years ago, but there are people at Microsoft who've been there for 30 years. That's privilege. And so for me too, people have said, well, I'm in this meeting, or I've been given this opportunity to present a paper, but I have the networks and I have the visibility in the company. Is there anyone else that I can bring in who's not here already? And so I've been fortunate to be at the receiving end of a lot of those people who said, hey, I've done this paper reading many times before. How about you? Why don't you come? You need to build your network in the company. So let me give you this opportunity. And that's the power of using privilege to be an ally and to look around you and say, who's not here? Let's bring them in. And it takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. It also takes a little bit of guilt. It takes a little bit of shame. Otherwise, we're not moving forward. So let me tell you my story about shame, right? And guilt. So just like I have been fortunate to have been at the receiving end of a lot of privilege and a lot of allyship, I have instances in my life where I've not been such a powerful ally or exercised my privilege. Give you just an example from, you know, my non-work life, where I was on a plane one day, San Francisco to Singapore. I was living in Singapore those days. Long flight, 19 hours, some weird thing like that. And there was a mom and a child on the plane. And the child was autistic and having a really, really hard time with the plane. The plane ride was just hugely distracting, and the child was screaming because, you know, autistic children have that difficulty with unfamiliar territory. And the mother was traveling along with the child, and she was struggling. But then, the passengers started to make unkind remarks. I think people are not aware or educated enough to understand the autism spectrum in many cases, even if they have the intent, the understanding of the autism spectrum, what that means. So there were a lot of unkind remarks going on about, oh, well, this is a long flight. Is this child going to, scream like this throughout, and so on and so forth. And I was just sitting there and I just felt really badly for the child and for the mother. But did I go up and actually insert myself and actively speak up? I did not, right? I listened, I empathized, but the final act of allyship is actually standing up and speaking. And so for me, I remember that incident to this day, that I did not do that. Whereas the me today, the me now, I think I would be able to do it. And what's the difference between the me from, I think that was about 8 years ago to now, is just that I've practiced more. I've said and done some really wrong things, which made me feel good, but not necessarily help the people that I was trying to be an ally to. And so a lot of the times, I think I said and did things that made me feel like I was wearing the Wonder Woman or a Superwoman cloak, but was it really helping the other person? Because whether you're an ally or not is not determined by you. It's determined by the person that you support. And so many times we hesitate to speak. I think I hesitated on the plane that day because I didn't have the language. I didn't know what to say. I was really scared about getting beaten up by these other passengers, right? And so the fear of not knowing what to say and fear of making people annoyed, resentful, stands in the way of us being strong allies. And to this day, I feel really guilty about that. But that guilt, I think, has propelled me to do better. And so if we all think about our allyship journeys, I think there's a little bit of guilt and shame involved. Otherwise, we're not moving forward fast enough. So, education over, then I started to work. And my first role was in a manufacturing company, okay? 3,000 men and 1 woman. I know this is very cliched, but that's exactly what happened. And so they had to build a bathroom for me, et cetera, et cetera. That was fine. It was an enormous experience. Asian Paints, if there's anybody from Asian Paints, wonderful company, but very quick to learn how to have a gender balanced workforce. They built that bathroom really fast, but the fact was that there were 3,000 men. And when I was starting my career in that environment, I did not have any allies. Instead, I had people who were placing bets on how long I would last there. And I did not last there very long. Because when you repeat something enough times, that is going to become a reality. And so regretfully, I left in a very short while. But then the latter part of my career, I had immense allyship from people around me and from the managers I worked with. I moved to Singapore. Very big cultural difference in the workplace. I know we think of Singapore as like 2.5 hours away and multicultural, but actually it's not. There are undercurrents of a lot of ethnic issues even in places like Singapore. So I had the first few months were culturally very difficult because I had little kids. And one day my manager said, well, I think we should all go out and Friday night. And I thought, oh, we're going to go bowling or some such thing. And I'd be able to get home to my kids by 6. Oh no, he actually wanted to go to dinner and he wanted to go to a bar and whatnot. And some of us had little children that we wanted to go back home to. And then he said something which was very, very non-inclusive. He said, oh, well, all these Asian women, you know, they're no fun. And I looked around and said, why are the non-Asian women not saying anything? Right? Because no one was saying anything. And that really stuck in my mind as a wonderful opportunity for someone to have gotten up and said, you know, very gently, I think allyship has to be compassionate, it has to be kind. We need to be allies to ourselves. We need to be allies to even the people who are actually perpetuating this behavior. And we need to be able to separate the person from the message. So my manager was a wonderful person, the very person who said this. I'm great friends with him. But then this was, his words need to be separated from the person. And so that would have been a perfect time for someone to say, hey, you know, let's find something that all of us can do and we're all comfortable with, right? And even better, if they could have pulled him aside and said, hey, can I just talk to you for a second? And explain to him how powerful a manager he would be if he was more inclusive, right? Now that didn't happen, but that's something that stuck in my mind. And now I just think when I'm in those types of situations, I always remember the privilege that I have today and stand up and speak with more courage. I have many such examples of managers and co-workers and people at home who, you know, really lifted me up. I also have great examples of how I was marginalized. We've all been marginalized in society, at home. We've been marginalized at work many times. And I think it's equally important to remember to talk about those instances well and learn from them and be better people. So I have been, I mean, you know, I do HR, okay? I've done HR for 30 years. And being an HR leader is, you know, that movie, what's the movie that Joaquin Phoenix's movie, Walk the Line? Walk the Line, is that the one with Reese Witherspoon? Yeah, no,
Yeah.
if you all, but
yeah, absolutely. Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash, we're always walking the line. That's the, unfortunately, the life of an HR leader. Beyond the good stuff about developing people and, you know, all doing the fun things, we walk a line. We walk a line because we are the stewards for the organization and for people, and we're stewards of culture. And it's a hard gig, I will tell you, it's a really hard gig because it needs courage. To do an HR role with integrity really needs a lot of courage. And so business leaders who are huge and powerful, you know, I mean, they're inventing products that are beloved in the world, right? I work in tech mostly. So I have leaders who have a lot of swagger about, oh, now I'm doing the coding for Teams or for Zoom or whatever, and I'm changing the world. Yeah, they're changing the world. But at the same time, there are instances that happen in the organization where the HR leader has to stand up and hold up a mirror to business leaders. That's our job. And so we need a lot of air cover from our own managers. And I've been marginalized by business leaders who've told me, well, you know, this is none of your business, and you're going to go and sit over there and, you know, just do your job. That is terribly non-inclusive. And I've had managers who stepped in to say that, to call leaders on this behavior. Right? When I was younger in my career, I couldn't find the words and the language to be an ally to myself. It's important to learn to be an ally to yourself as well. And, you know, you will not make everybody happy, but the ones that are not happy probably are not worth being your friends. It's cool, right? So I learned the hard way to be an ally to myself, and I've had people who spoke up on my behalf when I was marginalized. So all of these situations have happened, And I've experienced, around me and just even me, the experience I've gone through, a lot of issues around privilege, around covering, where people feel like some part of them is going to be stigmatized. And so they come to work trying to hide that part. And can you imagine, that is so exhausting. I've done that too. I've hidden parts of myself which I felt were going to be stigmatized, right? For the longest time, I wouldn't put pictures of my kids on my table. And it was the fear of judgment, that you have a family, and so are you going to be really committed to work? And all of those judgments that I feared, which made me keep my family and my work life really separated. And I see so much of covering. I have people, friends of mine, co-workers on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, who go to great lengths to hide their identities because of the judgment of people around. And it is exhausting, and it makes, it's unnecessarily so. It makes just for, a society that is unlivable and workplaces that are unlivable. And so I think there's a lot for us collectively to do together. Now, I feel like I've spoken for a huge amount of time, so I'm going to stop.
I must say that at least for me, and please use the thumbs up icon, everybody else, if you agree with what I'm going to say. But I think for me, that was so articulately expressed, Namratha. You've actually covered so much ground in what you said. And I found myself reflecting on all the opportunities that I had to be an ally and that I may have missed. I think all of us missed those. I found myself reflecting on incidents where I may have acted in a prejudiced way, given my own conditioning and baggage, right? So, I think, thank you for sharing all of that so authentically. And it's a great reminder for me personally that we are all work in progress. We may have a starting point, and that starting point may be influenced by our conditioning and prejudice and bias. And, we may make mistakes, but each of those is an opportunity for us to consciously shape ourselves into not just what my friend Vijay here likes to call a virtue signal link, but actually the way you've articulated that allyship is not only about saying the right things, it's about taking the actions that end up making others feel included and supported. So I think that was very articulate and very thought-provoking for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Aman. And thank you, Namratha. That was truly inspiring and very, very powerful. There were so many points that you covered, which were so relevant. And I'm just going to pick on one point for now. And with your permission, ask a few questions around that. So you spoke, yeah, thank you. But I also want to say something about allyship. You spoke about taking action. It's not about, it's also about doing. That's essentially important. For me, allyship is also about believing. Do you believe that you are an ally?
Yeah.
So it's shifting the belief system. And that beautiful belief system that was there in your family that you spoke about, where women were given the choice. So giving choice is about empowerment. So that was also truly inspiring. So thank you for that. And then I'm coming back to the point that I want to, deep dive a little. You spoke a lot about privilege. You also spoke about instances where you felt marginalized. You spoke about feeling excluded in the space of a lot of other male colleagues around you. So in all these experiences, I'm sure there must be some unique experiences of biases that you must have experienced. And I wanted to ask you, just as in guidance, biases is something that's ingrained in our system. We all have biases, but how does one deal with biases? What has your experience been as a leader How do you, keep a check on your own biases? And as someone who's growing in their careers, how do you deal with biases? So over to you for some great inputs on that as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When I attended your last inclusion circle, or I listened to the recording, the last one, Priyanka Nambudiri, right? You talked about bias, and I think you did a poll, Mishti, at that time about, do people feel
Bias blind spot.
Yeah, and I think most people did say, yes, we do have biases, right? All of us do. And I think the danger is if any one of us feels like we don't have a bias. So, as I mentioned, I think that our acculturation and the value systems we grow up with can work on our behalf to make us more inclusive as human beings, and they can also work against us and create exclusion for the people around us. So, for example, I'll tell you, I'm just oversimplifying here a little bit, right? But in my family, education was a value. And so for me, for the longest time, I thought my bias, I had a huge bias against people who didn't have a formal education, right? And that would have pretty much, I think, excluded all the tech titans of the world, right? Who dropped out of business school to found the greatest companies on the planet. But I just felt like, if people don't have formal education, then they're not worthy enough. So if you overuse a value, it can become a prejudice or a bias. And later on, I learned that I need to listen to myself. I need to listen to the talk in my head. If I have a particular reaction to somebody, why is it that I have a reaction? What is it about them that I am reacting to? What is the trigger? I think once you pause and reflect on that and suspend judgment for a bit, it can make us at least minimize the bias or the prejudice, right? I think it was Abraham Lincoln. I don't remember quotes very well, but this one I remember. Abraham Lincoln apparently said, "Why don't I like this person? I need to learn more about him." Why don't I like this person? I need to learn more about him. Yeah? So bias and prejudice, I think I've experienced bias and prejudice many times, and I've also been the perpetrator of bias as well, right? I come from a little bit of an anglicized family, I would say, and the value of speaking great English, that was a value in my family. We all had to speak proper English. And the other day, I'll tell you an instance. This is like literally 2 weeks ago, and I feel really ashamed of these things when I experience this. So I was talking to somebody. Actually, it was somebody who was trying to help me do something on my computer, and I was talking to him, and I was just thinking, oh my gosh, this person's language is so poor that it's going to take me hours just to get through this. And I was so distracted by that I could not focus. Okay, horrible bias. So again, we need to step back and pause and say, what is it that's triggering me in this person? Can I defocus from whatever it is that's triggering me and just focus on what he has to offer? Because our brain, I think, works. There's a person called Daniel Pink. If you want to learn about what triggers us, read Daniel Pink. Basically, he says there are two systems, okay? So our brain, from prehistoric times, is used to thinking about people as a friend or as an enemy. Right? That's how the brain has been conditioned. And there are so many activities that the brain is trying to process, but honestly, it's not possible to process everything at one time. And so we take shortcuts. We say, oh, this person, we don't have the time to process everything. So we say, well, this person is ineffective because they don't speak the language well. That's a bias that our brain goes to really quickly because we're trying to multitask. So he says that there is another system which involves being more mindful and slowing down and being more effortful is the word he uses. And so if you do that, then I think you're able to understand and be curious about yourself and ask questions to yourself about why is this person triggering a reaction? So that's unconscious bias. But then there are also conscious biases that we all perpetuate, right? Like, okay, I've stopped saying in my resume that I'm from XLRI Jamshedpur. It doesn't matter. That was like a million years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It really doesn't matter where I'm from. But in the workplace, I see leaders from XLRI wanting to hire people from XLRI. Why? Yeah, because my assumption, my bias is that XLRI produces the best graduates, the best MBA, students. That's a conscious bias.
Wonderfully said, Namratha. In fact, yes, that talks about, yes.
Sri, on the chat window said the similarity bias.
Yes, absolutely. It's also called the affinity bias.
Yes.
So,
Affinity bias.
so we tend to connect with our in groups.
Yes.
And unfortunately, allyship also sometimes happens along with affinity bias. You tend to support people from your in groups.
Absolutely.
And what you spoke about the thinking systems of thinking one and thinking two, think fast, think slow. That is also very powerful because one needs to really slow down one's thinking and be really mindful.
Yes.
Because it is mindfulness that can help overcome, implicit or explicit bias. So very powerful points indeed. And thank you for sharing that. I would now hand it over to Aman for the next question.
Sure. Actually, with your permission, I'm going to take a little detour, Namratha. Very interesting thing that had happened, and we had agreed that we'd actually bring it up during our, during this episode. Yeah. You talked about covering, but you'd also given that wonderful example of how we all cover in our lives, and you were sharing, that there are things that make you cover.
Yes.
And so, do you want to quickly touch upon covering as well?
Yeah. So I think these are all topics that are interconnected, right? When we talk about allyship, we cannot speak about it in isolation. We have to talk about it in relation to privilege, in relation to covering, in relation to neurodiversity. And there's so many different strands of diversity, right? That we need to be allies.
Chronotype diversity, like you and I were talking about.
Absolutely. Look, I'm sick of being told I'm a slacker, okay, because I start work at 11 a.m. Nobody remembers I work till midnight, but they say, oh, you start at 11 a.m. What? Okay, so chronotype diversity. Absolutely, yes. So we need to be allies no matter what the strand of diversity is that we're trying to pull in, right? And so you asked me to talk about covering, huh?
Yeah, I mean, there was that wonderful example you gave about hair related to covering, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So this is, so Amar and I were talking, we were just chatting about all the different ways in which people cover, right? Now, I've seen extreme emotional and physical trauma in people around me because they felt the need to cover. A part of themselves that is so intrinsic to them, but that they fear is going to be stigmatized by people around them. I already mentioned to you that there are people on the LGBTQ spectrum. There are people with invisible, like neurodiversity related issues that they're going through, where the stress and the trauma is unbelievable. And so how do we demonstrate allyship towards people who are covering? I think it's a tough one, and I've also not, learned to. I've not mastered that skill yet, and I'll tell you why. Because I think when someone is covering some very, very integral part of themselves, they're already under a lot of stress, and so even with the right intentions, if I as want to be an ally and I want it to be a verb and not a noun, it places more stress on them if I go up to them and ask more questions. And so I've learned that we need to also use our judgment about how to ask the question and when to ask it. And sometimes just saying, as a manager, I've learned to ask the question, how has your day been today? What challenges have you come across? And what are the one or two things that I can personally do to make this a more inclusive environment or a team for you? Yeah. And using judgment about when to ask and how much to ask is a skill that we all need to develop, because remember, the person at the other end who's actually covering is undergoing a lot of emotional trauma, yeah, because it is exhausting not being able to bring all of yourself to the workplace and constantly having to hide a really important part of you. Now, coming to my hair example, I was telling Aman that, believe it or not, there is empirical research that says that women feel compelled to straighten their hair in the workplace. There's empirical research, okay? And this is 2021. And so, I mean, there are women here, right? I'm sure that many of you will resonate with what I'm saying, whether it's a hair example or something else. But the pressure we feel to show up in a certain way, and I'm not intending to exclude the men. I think everybody has this pressure to show up in a certain way, right? But just for a minute, let me talk about hair, which is a thing that's very dear to me. Look, today I spent an hour straightening my hair, right? And I was debating, should I do this or not? And then in the end, I gave in and said, you know what, let me just do it. But I think that's the pressure we feel about needing to show up in a certain way. And there is, as I said, there's research that women feel extraordinary pressure. So starting with that really, simple example, as a lighthearted example, the other extreme is really when you're trying to hide a very integral part of you. Yeah? I've been in a situation where we were all sitting at the table eating lunch. And there is a team member who's, for all practical purposes, single, right? We don't know anything about his family, but he brings the most delicious food that we all end up sharing at lunch. And one day he brought something lovely, and we had a great time with his lunch. And someone asked, hey, so-and-so, you always bring great food, and is your wife must be a fabulous cook. He did not say anything. No? Didn't say anything. He just smiled and said thank you, but no response. And then somebody else pipes up and says, oh, you know what? I heard that you're gay and therefore you're probably not married, right? And I think that was traumatizing, right? He just packed up and he left the table. And he had covered that part of himself for years because no one knew that he had a family, which was probably a little bit different from the families that his teammates had. That's about it, just different. But no one knew that he had a family, because there were literally no signs on the table, on his work desk, nothing. And so when I think about him, I just think about just how stressful it must be to live that life, right? And so what I did after that is another story. I'm ashamed and I have guilt about certain circumstances, but in this one, I felt like I was able to do the right thing, which was I went and checked in with him. First of all, check in with the person who's been at the receiving end. Check in, and that means a lot to people. And then come back and educate the rest of the team in a very gentle, compassionate way. Right? And when you're able to do both, first of all, checking in with the person who has been at the receiving end of an iniquity or a microaggression, and when you're also able to hold up a mirror to the people who have perpetuated that microaggression or iniquity, then I think, you're well on your way to becoming an ally. And kindness and compassion really, really matter. Because you see, we all have the right intent. It's just a skill that needs to develop. I believe that most of mankind has right intent. It's a skill. And so separate the person from whatever they said or did with kindness.
Wonderfully said.
I think that's a very powerful story there, Namratha, and I'm so glad, because for me, again, personally, without you sharing this story, I would have no personal insight on how, let's say, somebody who is gay would be covering at work. And you're saying, okay, everybody else is free to put pictures of their spouses, but because somebody is gay, they hesitate because they don't want to draw attention to that. They don't want to be judged. So they don't have the privilege of sharing their personal life, on their tables with anybody else. And that's a very, very powerful example. And I'm so glad you shared that. Thank you. And, I remember the conversation we had about covering, you were talking about the kind of thing that women go through. I think that's resonating with some of the comments, Srijan or Sirjan, Prasanna and Nabila have also mentioned the amount of things that women have to do to just fit into these external norms. And I just want to very quickly show everybody a quick picture of somebody who chose that I will not cover. I will not fit in. I will accept my hair the way it is. And if society feels that they don't want to cooperate with me because I don't fit in, then so be it. And here is that person. Yeah, just take a look at that hair, people. Such lovely hair. Right? Yeah. And here's what I believe. Here's what I believe. I think this is my hypothesis. My hypothesis is that human beings don't have unlimited resources. We don't have unlimited energy, whether it is physical, cognitive, emotional. We have limited energy. We can choose to waste our energy on covering, fitting in, and things like that, or we can choose to channel our energy into our work, and we can then be geniuses or borderline geniuses like Einstein. So as people who inhabit the workplace, who are obsessed with performance, one way to look at performance is, okay, can I free people up entirely to be who they are? And maybe that'll give them the additional energy to then focus on work and productivity and everything.
Yeah. I think that's the role that all of us have to play, right? Wherever we are, home, society, workplace.
Absolutely.
Yes,
and just to add to that, Aman, Namratha, what you were saying, I think what's really important for leaders is to create an environment of psychological safety.
Yes.
So just accessibility is not inclusion. Just because you get accessibility to leadership or to interact with them is not inclusion.
Yeah.
You should also feel that you're heard, you're acknowledged, and you're comfortable to show up and bring your whole self to work, because so beautifully said, there's a lot of burden that's felt if you're not, the ask of the mask is quite tiring. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, and there's also this fear of authority complex, or, reprimand that becomes the ask of the mask. But to be able to just remove the mask and, as Aman so beautifully said, free yourself would
Mhm.
really peak performances.
Yes.
So that's wonderfully said.
I just want to add to that, Mishti. I think, yeah, enabling people with environments
Mhm.
that help them to get their most authentic selves to work is just a very small part of it. I think they just need to be enabled to live their own lives. There's so much life outside of work, right? Our schools, right? I mean, and our schools and our institutions are such a microcosm of our society.
Mhm.
If you look at our, the townships, I was just thinking the other day, and we were in fact talking about something very similar, that even today, with so much of reading and awareness that I have for the LGBTQ community, am I really ready to see a lesbian or a gay couple with an adopted family in my society? Maybe today I would be very mindful of it, but as a society or as an ecosystem, I think there's so much of work to be done, because it's a lot to do with how we're raised, right? Our backgrounds, and a lot that we've been taught right from our, how we raising our children. I think everything really goes into building a meaningfully inclusive society. If I'm just allowed to be myself at work, and when I come back home, I'm told that I'm a woman and therefore I should be the one taking care of my child and not my husband, I'm not going to feel great about it, right? I mean, because a lot of my life is also comprised of what I want to do at home, right? And I need that equity everywhere, right? So
Wonderful.
yeah. So but these are so relatable examples that each of you gave. And Namrata, thank you. I think some of those that I'm listening to, in terms of you not posting pictures with children because you just going to be such blind spots, right? I mean, with the right intent also, you may assume that you may not get opportunities, which is something I've gone through,
Yeah.
right? There are times when I've possibly worked virtually because my child was not okay, not well, but I possibly was massively high on productivity.
Yeah.
But it's just in my own head,
Yeah.
assuming that do I do that need for validation,
Yes.
right? In terms of, am I giving enough?
Yeah.
Uh, could I have done a better job with this project, right? Because the last 5 days I've really been working virtually. I could have possibly done a better job if I had a FaceTime right out there, because there's so many other people who possibly may not be doing half of what I would be doing, but have an advantage of FaceTime out there, right? So I mean, a lot of those unconscious things, and thankfully the pandemic, because of the virtual work, has killed down. Thankfully, it's now.
Yes.
And I was talking about this the other day with somebody in my organization, that I think there's some great things that will possibly come out in the composition of what work is going to look like
Yeah.
for millennials, right? Because a lot of these biases, those layers of how you look, how well are you connected, in all the right ways, right, will possibly go away. They're going to shed off, because eventually what's going to define work is the value that you truly bring to the table, the compassion and empathy for your people that you truly bring to the table, right? And there's so many other things, right? So, but yeah, I think some of those examples were massively
Yeah.
relatable.
Yeah.
Thank you so
I,
much, Risham.
yes.
Thank you for sharing.
I think it's the assumption bias, right? I mean, you put pictures of your kids on the table, then someone out there is going to assume that you're not up for a stretch assignment or a new role. There's so much assumption bias that can actually,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
uh,
So it
you know,
puts a, yes,
assumption bias. So yeah,
yes.
so I think but the other thing is that it's not just us. I think um, we all of us, I believe all of us are change agents, each one of us on this call, right? And we need to think about inclusion as a systemic change. It's not one or the other. It's not just feeling, we need to feel empowered. And Mishti, remember when we were talking, prepping for this session, you said claim inclusion. I thought that was really powerful. I want you to talk about that just now. So I'm going to stop and hand over to you. But I think we need to feel empowered. However, the whole environment has to be raised at the same time. And so when we're trying to make actual impact, then everybody, individuals and teams and managers, everybody has to be sensitized. You know, their awareness needs to be raised. They need to be, to some extent, taught the skills and allowed to make mistakes. And so only then will the whole environment be a supportive one for people who want to claim their identity.
Yes. Yes. Namratha, so yes, we were having the conversation, and I was talking about the work that I did in the women leadership space. And across industries, there was this one common barrier that would come up, the fear to speak up because of the fear of judgment. And you've cited such interesting examples, about not putting up the pictures. So women leadership became a lot about managing stereotypes, managing perceptions. And that is why I felt that it is important to work on this theme, which is claim your inclusion, claim your space, claim your voice. First, feel your voice, that you too have a voice. So claim it, claim your seat at the table. So in fact, Aman, I'm taking too much of time, so I'll just take 30 seconds more and just share that. So there was a story that I had written on claiming your seat at the table, where I spoke about this concept that women in India or in a lot of cultures are used to serving. So, and I've experienced that a lot, where people are eating and they are serving, they're waiting and they're serving. So if you, I understand, they also, those also serve who stand and wait. There's a code that says that. But in women's case, you don't have to always serve. You have to sit at the table and join people and, claim your inclusion. So it's really, Resham, what you said, it starts with your grandmothers, with your mothers at home. It's about going beyond serving and claiming your place at the table, claiming your seat at the table. So,
and I think it's equally critical for our men. I feel for our men, right? I mean, while we always talk about all the genders, right? But I do think that it's equally critical for us to just let men be what they want to be. Yeah. Only when you enable them to really be what they want to be, will we really truly have an inclusive society, right? I mean, versus bounding them into their stereotypes, right? Specifically in an Asian context, right? We're always considered men to be extremely masculine and extremely strong, but that's really the story that we've been telling to everybody, right? But I do think that it's so important for us as women and for all the other genders to succeed. It's just so critical that men get their best selves and they're allowed to sort of do what they would want to do in a modern society as well.
I think
thank you so much.
Yes.
I'm saying thank you so much for saying that. I'm sure that quite a lot of other men who've been dying to say stuff like that, but have hesitated because there's this fear of being seen as anti-inclusion when you bring yourself up. It's a little bit like Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter. So people are afraid of doing that, and I'm very thankful, Resham, Nabila, and the rest of you for bringing this up. I think it's really important that you're saying that. Yeah. Thanks. Mishti, I'm going to invite you to the next question that you had in mind.
Sure. So I would like to ask you, Namratha, we've spoken a lot about claiming inclusion and diversity. But from an organization context, one has to move the needle from diversity to inclusion. And for that, it is also important to measure inclusion. So it would be wonderful if you can share some practices in your organization or practices that you've seen in the ecosystem that measure inclusion.
Yeah. You know, you're right. I think, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done, right?
Mhm.
And so we've got to find ways to move the needle and be able to hold ourselves accountable for impact. Um, there are some aspects that are amenable to numbers more easily than the others, right? So, for example, representation of all kinds, not just women, but representation of other strands of diversity, I think is very amenable to numbers. But then organizations typically, focus on the easier one, which is the hiring numbers. And I think we have to look at representation holistically. We have also to ask ourselves the question, what are we doing to develop and retain the diverse populations that we have? It's not just about hiring, but are we creating a climate where people of all kinds of diverse populations feel they can do their best work and live their best lives? And I don't think we focus enough on that aspect. So typically the poor talent acquisition teams are stressed trying to find, people to hire, but are we holding ourselves accountable for the people we're losing? Because people are leaving organizations because they do not find the environment inclusive. What are we doing with managers who are not working fast enough to create inclusive teams and inclusive environments, right? Are we holding managers accountable, or are we continuing to promote and reward them? So I think that is, again, as I said, it has to be systemic. I don't think we can create inclusive workplaces or societies if we just focus on one process or the other. It has all to come together as a system. So from there, but inclusion and belonging is a feeling that people have, right? And so there are some markers, but at the end of the day, it's a feeling. Do I feel included, respected, or not? And so I think there are formal and informal mechanisms to measure inclusion. So as an organization, every large organization I've been at, we've measured inclusion indices, which work off of a set of questions that we ask employees, not just one time during the year, but continuously, every quarter, about how they're feeling inside the organization. That's the motherhood and apple pie statement. But two clicks down is, do you feel you are heard in your team? Do you feel, questions like this, do you feel like your teammates share information and resources openly with you? Does your manager actively create a climate where everyone feels they belong? So there are specific questions that we ask, but there's also this Uber question about, do you feel included or not? So I think we can measure inclusion formally through those channels, but also informally. I think it's very important to have informal listening mechanisms as well, where managers themselves need to be open and have a sense of trust with their teams to be able to ask the question continuously outside of a formal survey process, right? They need to be asking that question on a daily basis. After every meeting, can we do like a 5-minute debrief to say whether the team felt this was an inclusive meeting or not? What could we do differently at next week's staff meeting? Right? So managers need to be held accountable for getting that informal feedback on a continuous basis as well.
Great insights, Namrata. And yes, managers need to be held accountable. Also, at our organization, ODA and Orglens, we use technology to measure inclusion, where we believe that the social network plays a big role. So, moving the needle from human capital to social capital, how people are actually connecting with each other. So, who are the influencers in the system? Where is the trust flowing? Where is the support flowing? Who do you reach out to get your work done? Who do you reach out to, for trust? And is there leadership accessibility? How inclusive are the leaders themselves? So we have a process. We use around 7 questions based on sociometry
Yeah.
to measure inclusion in an organization based on the social networks. So it's moving the needle towards social capital.
Yeah.
And great sharing, everyone. That's wonderful. Aman, would you want to ask someone anything? Would you want to ask a question to Namratha?
Sure, sure. Why don't we do one more? There's a little bit of an echo.
Yes.
I can hear my own voice. I'm just going to request everyone to try putting themselves on mute. Maybe we'll just see if that works. Yeah, that's working. Great. Thanks. So, just one more thought that I want to hear from you, Namrata. When it comes to our own learning in the DEI space, you mentioned that, look, the ecosystem needs to evolve for us to actually become more inclusive places, whether it is society, our communities, or it is our organizations. And I was curious about what your thoughts are. What is it that we can do as individuals to educate ourselves, to learn more about the DEI space so that we can contribute to, well, creating that ecosystem?
That's a great question. And I think about it in this way. I think we all need to start with building our awareness. Building our awareness and educating ourselves. Now, I think there are a lot of resources in the world right now that enable us to educate ourselves. Whether we work for an organization or whether we are, not in organizations, there are lots of resources available for us to read and, go to class. And there is an element of formal education that's involved, right? Because everything is not intuitive. So that is one aspect. And then awareness. I think once we are aware and we have a heightened sense of awareness for what is going on around us, I think that's when we start finding opportunities to lean in as allies, right? Now, it could be as simple as being in a meeting and being on our phone and our laptop and not really connecting with the rest of the people on the meeting, so much so that you don't even notice that there is somebody who's trying to say something and is not able to get a word in. But if we are present fully and we have heightened awareness for what's going on in the room, then you will be able to spot this person. And I'm giving you the most simple of examples. You'll be able to spot this person who's been trying to speak, or you'll spot this and give them and clear the space, clear the way for them to actually say what they want to say, because you have the privilege of being able to do that. Or somebody who has just been spoken over, right? You'll notice these things if your awareness is heightened. So that is one incredibly important thing, the education and awareness. And then the next thing is really be curious, right? Ask questions. Use your judgment about what to ask and when to ask and how much to ask, but be curious, because almost everybody, even us on the call today, are living an intersectional life. We're not just the people that show up in this call like this. There's so much intersectionality that is behind each one of us. So be curious and ask questions and be humble about it. I think that is the other thing. And then those two things, the awareness and the curiosity, will equip you for that final step, which is courage. So we can't leap to courage without the first two steps. Then we're going to be really ill-equipped. But courage is the last step, and you should be prepared for that, right? With the right awareness, education, and curiosity. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you. I think you brought up that, look, there are formal and informal methods available to us for us to grow our learning exposure in this field, and of course you added that last bit of courage, which I think is really important. How do all your knowledge and wisdom is only useful if you're going to turn that into a verb.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. So I think we're at that point now where we're done with the questions for Namratha, and Mishli, my friend, is going to possibly open it up for the rest of us to participate, to ask questions, etc. So Mishli, over to you.
Thank you, Aman. So such powerful sharing always brings up certain emotions and feelings and experiences. And that is the context of a sharing circle or a sharing forum. So may I invite all of you to share whatever shifted within you or anything that is, struck a chord within you, anything that you want to share. You can unmute yourself, you can share, you can put it on the chat box. This is a safe space beyond judgment, beyond bias. We are here to listen to you and we would love to listen. So over to this wonderful forum. Anyone like to share?
Hi, I'm Prasanna. Can I be heard? Yeah, sure, cool. So yeah, I'm from Lucknow and running this little organization called Bewaja. And here we do all the things which the society say is bewaja, it's not required. And empathy is one of them. It's not required, they say. Kya kar raha hai? Kaam karo. काम से काम मतलब रख लो, लोगों से क्या relation है, it's okay. So we do everything which has been told, and we work with young people to create safe spaces. So that was very exciting for me to join this discussion, because I really wanted to understand about inclusive spaces within organizations and within communities. And allyship, the stories which Namratha connected with herself were really inspirational. I was able to have that lens, oh, actually, let's go deeper into our conditioning also, to understand from where our allyship has come, and when creating safe spaces for others. So that was a major takeaway for me. I just wanted to share one thing that I don't remember, but somewhere I saw this pyramid where it was this hierarchy of things, where it was like intelligent, genius, and was stopped by simple. Above genius is simple, just being simple. Sometimes very small things, simple things are genius. You don't really need a lot of tools or things. Sometimes just for safe spaces, like what the discussion was about having inclusion, having diversity, valuing diversity. I think so sometimes simple things like just being empathetic, creating a space where people feel fully heard. And it's very hard that actually our listening skills have weakened so much that to feel fully heard can be so powerful. Very simple, feels like, does that really work? It's not that like genius as a solution, but I have seen that in spaces where we have created that space where people feel fully heard can be genius in itself. So yeah, thanks for the discussion today.
Thank you so much, Prasanna, for sharing that. And indeed, your sharing was not bewajah. It was very powerful. Anyone else would like to share, or just ask any question to Namratha, or put in your sharing in the chat box?
I'd like to invite, if it's okay, Mishti. I saw
Yes.
Sujata, if she's still here. She is, right. Sujata, put something in the chat that was very interesting. That was about gender immersion, that experiment. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that, Sujata?
Yeah, I'd like to do that. And before that, Namratha, thank you so much for the sharing. It was so authentic. It really touched a chord, because there are some instances when we place ourselves on a pedestal thinking that we're talking about something, but you really share your personal experiences, and I'm very appreciative of that. Just want to share some of the work that we've done in our organization. I'm with Infosys, and these are some of the challenges that large organizations, small organizations have. So I put together an experiment around immersion, gender immersion. The idea was, when we are talking about, let's say, women empowerment, women leadership programs, typically we would have women who are probably very successful who would go ahead and conduct these workshops. But we want to kind of flip it. We also wanted to have workshops for men to sensitize them about certain aspects of working in a common space, inclusive environment, and all of it. And we kind of made sure that we had people, across genders and inclusive groups as well. We were talking about looking at an appreciative inquiry of what was happening in their space. And that also, when they heard some of the challenges that were being shared by people from different genders or inclusive groups, it created such a powerful impact on them, because they started looking at it as it wasn't like you're only talking to them and telling them to feel empowered. It's about what are the real challenges they're going through, and we call these gender immersion. But over a period of time, we wanted to remove that word gender also, because even that is creating some kind of a differentiation amongst people. But we wanted to call it an inclusive immersion exercise, and the impact was really good, because the whole idea was to build self-awareness, and we were able to hear each other's stories in a more open and more accepting kind of manner. Yeah, that's what it was about.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sujata.
Now, I think it's an important point that Sujata made, right? I do think that I do think there's a gender aspect to inclusion which is very real, and so we can't wish it away. But I think we need to be careful that we don't over pivot, right? Every single one of the topics we've discussed have been experienced by people across the gender spectrum. Across the gender. So, I happen to know John really well. He's dialed in today, and John busts every single stereotype of a man that we know, because he has raised 4 wonderful kids. He's had a really successful career. And so when I look at him, I think, we really need to make sure that we're inclusive in the way we talk about inclusion, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yes, it did. And when you mentioned that, you can't remove it completely from the equation, I agree with you. But we were consciously looking at not bringing it in while it was also in there. Yeah, just to make sure that that doesn't become the focal point of the discussion. There are so many other things. It's not as simple as a blunted emotion that somebody might have. It could happen with a male, female, or anyone else. Yeah? So those are some things that bringing to fore. But thank you once again, Namratha.
All right. So it is 6:30 p.m. and time to say bye. But before we do that, we would really want to thank Namratha for such powerful interaction, such inspirational sharing. And I'm sure all of us are going to really take home some wonderful guidances and some beautiful reflections. That inclusion, begins with the letter I, and it begins at our home. And it also, one thing that you spoke about in terms of creating a systemic change and looking at the whole rather than parts, the whole ecosystem. It reminds me of a poem of Tagore, which I'm going to tweak a little and say that let's create a place where the mind is without fear and the head held high. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. Where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of debt, habit, and bias. into that heaven of inclusion, into that heaven of, as you said, heightened awareness. Let us all awake. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. And it's truly wonderful to have everyone here as a part of Inclusion Circles. And before we close, over to Aman and Gulleen to do the honors or say anything they would like to close the circle.
I'm going to invite Gurleen to have a go before me because I have a tendency to, if I'm allowed to speak, I often don't leave anything else for others to say. So Gurleen, go first.
No, I think everything has been said and heard for, because today's session was so insightful, and it leaves all of us with, good time to spend for ourselves. And as Mishti said, inclusion begins with an I. And I'm grateful to have you all and to experience this. And I hope that as I grow, I expand this circle to everyone and starting from within. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Gurleen. I want to echo what you've said, Gurleen, and what everybody else is also saying in chat. There's vulnerability, there's leadership, there's empathy, humility, all of these things that Namratha, you demonstrated today. It was such a pleasure to listen to your sharing. It was just wonderful, and thank you so much for making the time and doing this for us. To everybody else, thank you for making the time and being here as well. We can keep this conversation going. Part of our goal is that people go away from an inclusion circle and continue to talk about these things. So if you've got reflections on today's episode, if this triggers off a thought in your head and you want to talk about it, please go and do it. If you want to put up a post or a message on LinkedIn saying, here's an insight that I gathered today, and tag us, please do that, because we'd like more and more people to hear what is it that we're talking about. And so go into your networks, talk about what insights you gleaned, and do the hashtag inclusion circle so we know what you're talking about, and we'll also jump in on that conversation. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Sujata, for your lovely comments. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thanks again, Namratha.